So I'm going to talk to you tonight a little bit about my journey and then some of the big fundamental concepts of Vedantic yoga practice and how that applies to the modern age. And I'm not sure how many of you, what you know about me. I'm sure I'm not as big a success as you've mentioned, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how my business has evolved. And basically we touch about 5,000 people a week come to our studios in Sydney. And we teach from a very traditional foundation, but have really dressed it up in a modern way so that we can express a level of wisdom that it's really hard to find, I think, in today's world, that level of depth. And we do it through a physical practice, a hatha yoga practice. But the physical practice is a very small part of it. We really use the physical practice as a vehicle of discovering a deeper dimension of ourselves. And then the byproduct is big biceps and long hamstrings, so it's a nice practice to have. Our constant search for pleasure, our constant search out there to satisfy our senses and our need to just fulfill pleasure is at the root cause of our suffering. And whilst ever we seek pleasure and we seek to fulfill it, it's always going to be followed immediately by suffering. And it's a very basic message that yoga teaches us. And we start to learn to detach from that need of just being driven by external focus and start to learn about internally what we can do to be fulfilled, not searching out there for the love that we need in here. And the yoga practice is really about learning how to create that. So whack that one up. Oh, you're going to throw them out? Throw it. Good stuff. So the modern yogi. So I'm going to take you through tonight just a little bit of my journey. It's quite unique. I've come from fairly heavy military background and professional athlete background into the yoga world and through some corporate business consulting and things like that to end up here. And every time I get interviewed, they say, how do you go from being a paratrooper and working in that sort of world to now being a yoga teacher, traveling the world teaching? And the interesting thing is the same discipline that drives you. It's just one's motivated out of fear and one's motivated out of love. And I had an experience in my life where divine intervention sent me into being a yoga teacher. It was never a dream, it was never anything I wanted to do, but I ended up through the doors of Dharma doing what I'm doing. So I'll speak a little bit about that tonight and just take you through some of the bigger concepts. Having a great technical night, there we go. So the story, my upbringing. So I was lucky enough to be introduced into yoga at a very young age. At about 14, I had what's called a non-dual experience. I grew up with my family, but had a lot of domestic violence and some turmoil. And when I was about 14, I got moved in with another family, my best friend from school. And my first yoga teacher was his mother and his father. And they taught me some beautiful lessons at a very early age that I hadn't seen. I hadn't been witness to just a calm, peaceful, happy way of being. I was in a very turmoil environment and had a father with an iron fist who eventually was taken away from us. But eventually moved in with this family of, I'll call them hippies rather than yogis. And suddenly I was in this environment where there was a lot of love. There was a lot more love around the place, and it was a beautiful experience to experience that at an early age. And so I used to, their father, Paul, used to take us out in the river each weekend. We'd pack up our bags and we'd go out to the river and we'd do 108 ohms like you've been doing tonight. And 108 is a very significant number. I won't go into it, but we do 108 ohms to celebrate the Upanishads and the dances of Shiva. And I had a 15-year-old kid, 14, 15, and you think this is pretty weird. And you're sitting out there and you've grown up in that environment. Next minute you're ohming to your heart's content. And I was quite intrigued by the whole process. And I went out there and I remembered about the 70th ohm. I had this experience where I was aware of Duncan. There's Duncan here, and there's the Om, and there's this connection. It was quite peaceful. It was a very concentrated state. And then through that concentration of just allowing myself to feel that level of vibration in my body, I had an experience where my identity, Duncan, the existence of who I am, completely vanished. And you merge with what's called the spiritual or transcendental world. And you get a glimpse of your mind completely stopping. No noise, no dialogue. Most of you right now have got a dialogue going on in your head, just working out, judging, discussing, wondering about the toilet or what next drink you're going to have. There's you and your mind here. And it's a constant dialogue. And the crazy thing is, who are you talking to? There's no one there. But it goes on, and it's possible to have that to stop. And I had that experience at about 14 years of age where it blew me away. I was about 7 seconds I sat with no mind and had a non-dual experience where I felt connected, a oneness to everything. And then I was able to bathe in that sort of state for the last 30 or so OMs. And then I came out of that and I was quite shaken by it. And I turned to Paul and Susan, my teachers, and said what had happened. And they gently explained the process of moving from concentration to meditation and having samadhi experiences. And I loved it. I thought it was amazing. And then desire welled up within me and I wanted it again. And it took another 6 years before I ever had that experience again in my life. And whenever we desire something like that, a practice like that, a non-dual experience, it becomes very elusive. We can't want ourselves into that state. We must surrender ourselves, surrender our identity, who we think we are. And it becomes an art form eventually, but it's the most peaceful state you'll ever feel in your life. And just a 3-second glimpse of it can really relax you for weeks, really shift you. And so that's what yogis try and master as they go. I can remember one time we were working in the garden. Paul used to have this amazing garden and we used to work out there out in the backyard, and he used to have some pretty good herbs growing in that backyard as well, actually. It's always a bit of fun at that age. And we were out working and he used to wear these weird clothes. He was a hippie, he lived in India for 11 years, and he'd wear all these big beads and his whites, and he had shaved head with a big beard. And I'd tease him being a little kid, you know. I'd always tease him about what he was dressed in and how weird he was, and always those little chants that he'd do, and he'd drink his own urine, he'd swallow towel, and all these things that are called shatkamas, which I learnt years later that are very traditional hatha yoga practices for cleansing the body. And I would tease him, and he'd get sick of me teasing him. And he'd turn around to me and this one time and he said, "Duncan, I am." Ah, ha, 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 ha. And I'd be like, "What?" And I'd look at him again and go, "I am." Ah, 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 ah. And he'd walk off on me. And I'd turn to my best friend, his son, and I'd say, "Simon, your dad is nuts. He never finishes his sentences." And we'd look at each other and be confused. And I learnt later on that I am is actually the fundamental concept of what we call jnana yoga, the yoga of wisdom. And it's to understand that whilst ever we try and define who we are through our identity of the house or the mother, the father, the businessman, businesswoman, brother, sister, whenever we try to define ourselves with the roles that we play in our life, it will always imply a limited perspective. That who we actually are and our potential of what we can be, thoughts will never be able to describe it. We can experience that state, but we can't know it. And yoga puts forth that we can prove that to you. We can teach you how to sit in stillness and have one of those experiences. You'll never be able to describe it and do it their justice. And it's really the essence of what yoga practice is all about. And we start to get those experiences. And I was lucky to have that at a very young age and understand that I am. And it becomes a very bittersweet story. About 5 months after those experiences, my best friend Simon, who had moved in with his family and started to feel peace for the first time in my life, was killed in a car accident along with my 2 other best friends, and one was crippled, another one was crippled for life. And we went through a lot of turmoil after that, a lot of anger. How could this happen? I just touched with the transcendental and now it was taking it away from me. And I went through, a period of just being an absolute rat bag and just being a wild young youth, angry at the world. And I was taken away from their family and not allowed to live with them anymore. And then about 2 years after that, I had to drop out of school and get a job and do that sort of stuff. I tried to keep my schooling up, but it was very hard to do, and I became a pastry chef, actually, a baker, and which I still enjoy doing. And I did that for about 2 years, and then my other best friend, the last best friend that I had, rang me up one night and told me he was going to commit suicide. And I tried to talk him out of it. He said, "I can't deal with this life. I can't hurt anyone anymore, and I can't feel this pain anymore." I said, don't do it. And he hung up the phone. And then I found him the next morning dead in his car. And so by the time I was 18, I'd carried 5 coffins to a crematorium, and most of them were my best friends. 2 of them were the closest people in my life. And I had this spiritual training that taught me about detachment at a large level, but I was being thrown into this absolute turmoil from a pretty intense upbringing to then a beautiful experience with a hippie yogi family to then just devastation. And rather than taking my own life and going that way or ending up with lots of drugs and all that sort of path that you can do, I really chose a different way to deal with that. And I learnt very early in my life that it would take great courage to be all I could be. And I developed this fearless attitude. And I became a very tough, strong, could take anything type of guy. And like a lot of young men do. And we develop that iron fist about us and close ourselves off. And I developed also at that time the victim mentality. And I got very good at telling my sob story. And I can tell you that can wear you out. And everywhere I went, I manipulated rooms of people by telling them how hard my life is. And now that story just, it repulses me. You know, and you compare yourself to other people in the world, you're not a victim at all. You haven't got a hard life, we've got a beautiful life. But I became very good at manipulating people with that sob story. And everywhere I went, I would tell it. And I carried that for about 7 years. Really just that story, and it became my identity. I was the victim. I'd had the hardest thing done by, beat my sob story sort of thing. And it would just wore me out and nearly killed me sort of in the end. But I had this fearless attitude that I was a warrior and nothing was going to take me out. So I thought, might as well join the army. And at the time, the army needed a nice fly half in their team at Duntroon, and I was awarded a scholarship to the Royal Military College Duntroon, which is officer training, and which is unusual for somebody because I didn't have the schooling grades, so a lot of things were moved out of the way, and I was given a scholarship to go and study at Duntroon down in Canberra. And it was amazing. It was the first time in my life I was hanging out with kids who'd been to private schools, and I was hanging out with all these amazing people who had dreams and had amazing, like I remember the first time I drove down the Spit Bridge when I was like 18 years old and saw Sydney and this new world of all these private school kids and everything. I was like, wow, this can all be created. You know, it's not the world that I grew up in. It's, look at this. And I started to transform my life in that way, and I became very good at the army. I became an amazing officer, and I won the prize at Duntroon for military skills and leadership, and became a very good leader, could inspire men because I could lead from the front. And had an amazing army career, went to the Australian Parachute Regiment for 3 years and led 30 soldiers at 21 years of age, 30 soldiers under my command. Most of them had been in combat and I was in charge of them, which taught me a lot about managing people and listening, really listening to people and how effective your leadership can be when you speak, literally, but when you speak, people listen. And then got sent to the School of Infantry and was an instructor up there for about 2 years, and had an amazing army career. And I was being streamlined for the SAS, and my best friend now is one of my close friends is the CEO of the SAS, and I'm very glad my life didn't end up in that way, because what he's had to do and take on is pretty enormous I think for human individuals to have to do. I really respect what he does, but it's a big ask on somebody. And I had what I call the divine intervention, and I was taken away on a exercise for 7 days without food and only 2 hours sleep a night. And they would test each day my leadership ability under that level of stress. And so I'd be out in the middle of the jungle and they'd give me a new set of soldiers that all slept all last night and all eaten, and I'd have to lead them into different, attack a hill or rappel down a ravine or, take a POW and, interrogate them and things like that. And I had to make the decisions and lead these men. And it's an exercise they do to test us on how good we can be under pressure. And I did the course and I performed very, very well at it. And on the last day I finished, got to the last checkpoint, and they said, right, you're done. Handed in all my stores, my radio, my flares, everything that we carry. And they said, 5 Ks that way, you'll find a big opening. That's where we're going to pick you up. Go and hang out there and wait there. And so off I took into the jungle. And I was walking along the jungle and I had these pains in my stomach, and I just thought they were hunger pains, the whole time. I hadn't eaten for 7 days. And I was feeling my stomach and I was just so sore, and I thought, I'll just sit down and have a little drink. And I put my knee on the ground, I grabbed my water bottle out of my pack and had a sip. And I felt this tear in my stomach. It was like boiling water was leaking into my stomach. And I was like, whoa, and I lay down the ground, I was vomiting blood immediately, and I was incapacitated. And it didn't matter how tough I got, it didn't matter how much of a warrior I was, I couldn't move and I couldn't fix the situation. And for about 2 hours I fought this pain, and it was the most, I've never felt pain like that ever since. I don't know if I ever will again. And I resisted it, and then I started to realise, wow, I actually might not make it out of this. And I started to contemplate my own death. And I remember back when Simon and Damien both died, I was allowed to sit with their caskets for half an hour each time and meditate with their bodies. And when you sit down with death and you really contemplate the impermanence of life, when it's that close to you, the permanence of spirit, the transcendental world, is revealed to you. It becomes very obvious that the spirit moves on. And so I started to make peace with that process. I started to go, this is it, this could be it. The chances of somebody walking the same path in the jungle to me are very slim. And I can't move, and there's something seriously wrong with me. And so that lasted for about 3 hours of me forgiving myself, forgiving my father, and just learning to love myself in a very different way. And I was lucky enough, after that went for about 3 hours, and it was the most euphoric feeling I've ever had. And I had another non-dual experience. That same experience that I'd had when I was quite a young teenager, and started to move into that transcendental world. And then I was lucky enough, one of my friends, one of the other guys doing the training, walked about 50 metres from me, and I yelled out to him. And he came over and carried me to a road which was about 1.5 kilometres away, and it was excruciating pain. And I was pretty much unconscious and out of what was going on by then. And he got me there. Anyway, it took about 8 hours to get me to an operating table. And they cut me open. They diagnosed me with a ruptured appendix. And they decided to cut me open here, searched around and went, uh-oh, it's not his appendix. So they took it out anyway. Because apparently you have to, if they put that scar there, you need to take that out so that if that does happen, they won't think that you've had your appendix removed. And they cut me from here to here and started searching around to see what was wrong with me. And what it was, I had a perforated duodenal ulcer, which your duodenum's just the first part after your stomach. And all that acid was leaking out, and it can eat through all your organs and blood, veins and things like that. And most people, 6, 7, 8 hours, your chances of living after that are getting slim. And so I was right on close to dying. And I woke up the next morning after the operation, and I was a super soldier heading for the SAS, playing professional rugby at the time too. And next minute I had like 5-inch scar here and a 6-inch scar here. And I woke up, my beautiful mother was holding my hand. And I woke up and I went, and I didn't know if I was dead or if I was alive, I was in heaven, what was going on. I had tubes coming out everywhere. And I saw my mum, and she started crying, and I started crying too. And I really learnt a lesson that, that's the arm in the edge, but I learnt this next lesson, that if compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And I'd learnt compassion for other people from the pain that I'd seen people go through when they lose people the closest to them. I was very compassionate, had a big heart, but it didn't include me. I didn't want to be happy. I was pushing myself to my limits and felt that I deserved to be happy. Had all these negative core beliefs about myself, that I don't deserve being happy, that I'm dumb, and all this stuff that drove me into being an amazing officer, but didn't serve me. It was out of a sense of lack. And so the divine intervention came in, and suddenly I was out on the streets. All I was a trained killer and a baker. Trained killer and a baker. And next minute I'm like, well, what am I going to do with my life? And I reconnected with my yoga practice. I'd kept it up a little bit in the army, but I reconnected with my yoga practice and started Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga and some very physical forms to rebuild my core. And all that traditional weight training and everything I'd done to be a footballer, I had to sort of stop, and I had to find a new way to focus on my body. And after about 2 years of traveling around and soul searching and traveling through the world and in India and just really practicing, the doors of Dharma really opened up for me. And I came back to Sydney after traveling for 2 years on like a spiritual quest, and a lot of partying, I must admit, but a spiritual quest. And I didn't even think about teaching yoga, and all my friends, I go to the gym and they go and hit the weights and I go and do handstands. And they'd all be like, how do you do handstands so well? I want to learn how to do that. And eventually there was too many people wanted to learn how to do handstands. So I said, well, I'll just hire a surf club on Saturdays and you can all come there, because I can't go to all your houses and teach you. And so the first day there was like 7 people there. The next week there was about 15, and then the next week was like 30, and the next week it was like 50 people showing up, putting $15 in an honesty box for 90 minutes down the back of the surf club. And I'm like, wow. And I didn't want the money for it, so I was giving it to Cancer for Kids Foundation for the first year that I was doing it. And I would teach these people yoga and the way I knew yoga, the way I developed it in my own body and what I'd learnt the Raja Yoga forms as a young child, and slip in the philosophy as I was training them through their bodies. And people loved it. People just loved it. They didn't even know why they were coming back, but they were coming back. But the real reason they were coming back is because we were transforming them. We were starting to teach them about these negative beliefs they have about themselves, these identities, the victim, the manipulators, the approval seeker, the people pleaser, all this stuff that goes on in our egoic minds. And we would bring this into the classroom and teach them, and it would really have a huge effect on people. And the byproduct, big biceps, long hamstrings, so people had a reason to come. And it was a beautiful experience. And about a year later, I started teaching formally. But I really learnt through that process of the doors of Dharma really opening up for me, is that I wasn't going to get to enlightenment by analysing others. I wasn't going to get there by looking at everybody else and picking them apart and do that. That I was only going to get there by observing myself. And I knew that I had to really get to know myself. I'd learnt compassion and I'd learnt courage. And they're like two wings on a bird that have to flap evenly. If you have too much courage, it'll cause destruction at a big scale, or it'll cause in your own body disease, which we saw with me, if it's not balanced. If you have too much compassion and no courage, it'll have very little influence wherever it goes. And so I learned that I had to balance these two, and that I had to stop judging everybody else. I had to really look deeply at myself. And then I thought, well, I might as well start teaching yoga formally. And off I went. And I opened my first yoga school really out of a guy rung me up one night, and he'd been to a yoga class of mine. I was teaching at a place in the city. And he said, hey, I've been to one of your classes. I really think you know what you're doing. You should buy this yoga school off me. I said, I don't want to buy a yoga school. What are you talking about? And he said, well, you're a really good teacher. You should buy this yoga school. And he said, in fact, even if you don't want to buy it, I'll give it to you for 3 months, and you can teach and run it for me. And if you like it after that, I'll sell it to you for a good price. And I was doing business consulting and leadership. That's trained killer, as corporate speak. I was doing leadership consulting, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I started to run it, and I started to really enjoy it, and people started to come, and I was like, I need to teach. I just need to keep doing this. It's helping so many people. It's helped me. And so I got everything I had, which was about $140,000 in those days, everything I'd saved since I was a little kid, and borrowed off my brother, and got it all together, and I gave it to this man. And I said, I'll take your studio, thank you. And it was all fitted out. It was an ex-Bikram studio, went bankrupt, and I said, thank you very much. And for the first year, I taught 18 classes a week. I ran the whole studio by myself, and I worked a full-time job. And I went from a $130,000 paying job a year at about 26 years of age to, I think, I earned $23,000 in that first year. And I was the happiest I've ever been in my life, because I followed my heart for the first time rather than my head, what I thought I needed to do. And suddenly, after about a year of really pushing myself and opening and creating P.L.A.Y, I opened my eyes and I had the busiest yoga school in Australia. Over 1,500 people a week coming through the doors and just exploding. And I didn't want to be Mr. Power Yoga. And then the pressure came of everyone's like, well, he's the yoga teacher. And you can imagine the stereotype that comes up when you think about the yoga teacher. I don't look good in fisherman pants, by the way. And suddenly everyone wanted me to be a traditional yogi, and I wasn't. I was just teaching what I know from my heart, and now I'm on the spotlight, and all the reporters are, asking to do interviews and stuff and expos, and on a small scale. I was a big fish in a very small pond, the yoga world. And there was a lot of pressure that came with it, and there was a lot of judgment from my old community, the traditional people who thought I was exploiting yoga and commercialising it in a way that wasn't suitable, which really hurt because there was a community that I loved. And I had a lot of doubt and fear, and I journeyed on anyway. And I was very lucky that in those early days that it became successful. And I learnt